Welcome to Beyond Wealth, Success Unscripted with Matt Calnan. Discover the personal drive, professional journeys, and business strategies that have made a real impact. It's success from the inside out.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today we're chatting with Scott Meyers, an experienced finance professional with over 20 years of leadership across various sectors. Starting in a large company and transitioning into smaller organizations, Scott has become a specialist in fixing broken toys. And Scott, I'm going to have to ask you about that one in a second here, but fixing broken toys and financial management. He's also building a rental real estate portfolio and enjoys playing music and staying fit. So first of all, welcome to the show, Scott. And do you want to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you're working on?
Yeah, so currently I'm working with a company called Pluralock, and we're traded on the TSX Venture. PLUR is the ticker on the TSX Venture, by the way. So if there's another PLUR out there, but don't look at them. Look at the Pluralock guys. We are a cybersecurity company, and I started about a little bit over a year ago there. They bought 4 acquisitions, needed somebody to help integrate them, so we've done that. Took a good chunk of cost out of the business, around $2 million, and are really focused on getting the business profitable and moving forward. Actually, today is serendipitous. We just launched a press release. We just got our largest contract yet. So it's been a very exciting time to work there. Definitely a lot of sweat and blood has gone into this last year of getting it from a state of, I'll call it, let's say, financial trepidation, or for financial, not so solid ground, to a much better state right now. And it's been a fun journey. It's also a great team. So that's kind of two of the things I look for: hard problems and fun team. Yeah.
Well, first of all, congratulations to you guys on the announcement there on the new contract, the big contract. So that's awesome. Can you tell me maybe a little bit more about your background? And I know you're American, you're an accountant by trade, so yeah. CPA in 2 different countries there. Can you go into that?
Yeah, so I started, in the US. I'm originally from the Chicago area, so kind of the Midwest US kind of vibe, and went to school there, and then started working for really a larger company in that area. With that experience, I was actually allowed to live in France for a couple of years. And then it took me to Canada, in Toronto, and was there in Toronto for 10 years. In that time, transitioned out of the large company role after about 14 years. Met my wife in Toronto as well, and then she got a job actually out here in Calgary, and we decided to move. And I got to tell you, it's one of the best moves. Heck, the scenery that we see out here is way better, and I mean, just the consistent, amazing sunrises is something you don't necessarily get when you're from Chicago or Toronto. Not that those areas aren't beautiful, but they're just kind of a little bit extra special here.
Yeah, there's buildings in the way everywhere over there. Less so in Calgary.
That's true. Yeah, instead of mountains, you have larger, more skyscrapers. Yeah, Calgary we have a good chunk in the downtown, but
yeah. So what type of industry experience? I know you're kind of broad in terms of the different industries you've been part of, but what does that look like?
Yeah, so I started out and I would call it first major company was manufacturing, and I would call them a tech company too, although they're kind of slowly understated in the electrical market. But I think that I would call them a tech and manufacturing company. Then I moved in Canada. Did a stint in cannabis, as one did at the time when I moved there. And also the nuclear industry as well as services. So, and I would say cybersecurity, kind of what I'm doing right now, lines up with we have a significant services component as well as a resale operation, and then on top of it some software. So had a variety. I think in finance, a lot of good practice rhymes across businesses. So there are specifics you can get into, but I think it's also if you're willing. My message to people in finance is if you're willing to just jump in and learn a business, your skills are pretty transversal. And so the more that you can learn, the more that you can start to be able to you'll be able to bring to whatever business you're at.
Yeah, I've often said too, is like, if you look at kind of the 3 functional areas of any business, so you got your sales and your marketing, right. You've got your actual operations, and then you've got what we'll call the finance and admin side. The sales and marketing and the operations can look very, very different in different industries, different companies.
Right.
But finance and admin is fairly static across the board. There's not a lot of change within it. The accounting doesn't really change all that much industry to industry. So it is kind of probably nice to have that ability to be able to cross over different industries, but also learn those industries from the operational side as well as you're immersed in that.
Yeah, and I think even, good practices from one area can be brought into another. And you could say like, well, services businesses, like I've worked with a marketing company. Their services are somewhat similar to even like what we're doing in cybersecurity in terms of
Right.
you want your people utilized, you need to have a pipeline of work. A lot of the stuff, like I say, rhymes. And it's how do you get there and how do you make sure that your sales team knows what they're doing and what the score is every day? How do you make sure that your operations teams gets that, like, oh, I can't, I love to give the customer freebies, but I can't actually do that if I, want to keep my paycheck, for perpetually. So
Yes.
there's certain things that you still need to get a hold of, and get wrapped around and monitor and help the business.
Yeah. Going from the US and then overseas to France there and then coming to Canada, what are some of the differences you see cross border and specifically maybe American to Canadian?
So I think Canada's a lot more laid back and slower moving. And I don't say that I say that as a fact, not as a judgment. Okay, just to be very clear, like there's some advantages. I think what I've noticed in Canada is there's a there's less tendency to overreact because people tend to be, I think, a little bit slower moving here in terms of like, let's think through things and let's not move too fast. And I'm making broad brush statements here, right? Because even between California and say like Chicago and New York, very
Yeah.
different. And same thing in Canada between like Vancouver and Calgary and Toronto and then Quebec, also very different. But in general, this is my broad brush. I also, find that like Canadians are still pretty laid back and pretty, I would say fairly more progressive on average. So if we just look kind of, and I don't want to go too far down this, but if I just say like conservative Canada and liberal Canada are kind of more, I think, centrist than you would get in the US, which tends to
Yeah.
be wider variety. Now, the disadvantages of not having all that dynamism is that sometimes that dynamism gets great things. It can cause huge problems, but it also can solve big problems. So the US tends to be, I would say, more volatile. Canada tends to be a little bit less volatile, but maybe less dynamic. And that's really the two differences. I think where people fail, I've seen expats fail when they come to Canada, is just not realizing that it's different, than like say the US or England. Those are the two ones that it's probably the closest together. But there's some subtle differences. And I always tell people, look, like you go to Canada, you still like everybody's nice to you. That doesn't mean you can be mean to them, or that doesn't mean you can kind of walk all over them because, as I say, like, one day if you're too mean, then one day you're just gonna wake up in the middle of the woods and like, you have no clothes on and there's wolves around and like all of a sudden nobody's there. Like you'll just like it doesn't work, but but at the same time, I think Canadians, do have that reputation and are pretty easy to get along with, but you have to make sure you're doing that work too.
Yeah.
So hopefully that makes some sort of sense and just kind of
Yeah, definitely. So maybe this one is a little more on the personal side here, but just some of the things that you talked about in your bio there, and I had one in quotes there around that fixing broken toys. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, look, a lot of businesses that I've jumped into, there's something kind of fundamentally wrong with either how their finances are working or the business process is working. And really it's coming in and being able to fix that quickly. So a lot of times, so one business that I work with had basically what happens is they have a great accountant, but that person can't scale as fast as the business scales. And so you look at the finance processes and a lot of them are broken. I've seen it where people are still writing stuff down on a piece of paper, and it's, it needs to be in an electronic system. And,
Yeah.
and some of it feels like very basic. One of the things I tell my teams is like, guys, it sounds stupid, but just organizing your files in a logical system can save you so much time. And I've seen teams just go, night and day with that little change. That would be like the one hack or whatever that I would probably use is just organize your files. But it's true. And I've done that in large companies where I've come in and I've just said like, wait a second, this area we can't even find where our historical information is, from last year. Why? Because it's
Yeah.
not organized. And that's, there's that, or there's like one company I stepped in and the system was just completely horked. Like they spent $1 million getting up this ERP and it didn't work for them. So diving in and figuring out how do we make this work and getting it up to speed and making sure that it's an actual viable product. But regardless of that, you need to still run your business while you're doing these systems. So that's kind of what I meant by the broken
Yeah.
toy.
Yeah. Funny actually that you kind of mentioned some of that stuff around the systems and the processes, because I think a lot of people would be somewhat shocked that even when you're dealing in quite large organizations, a lot of times there aren't really strong systems or processes, and a lot of it might be using an Excel sheet to track a month end on a billion-dollar company.
Yeah.
A lot of times you have that, or like you said, writing things down on pieces of paper, where we need to implement the systems, and people again would be shocked, I think, at knowing that some of these large businesses don't have
ERP
that.
change, and then they forgot about like the FP&A system, and then the FP&A system had to go back to Excel. And it was like, oh, well, we got to get done. So what do? You go back to Excel. I mean, my other view is, Excel is actually, I don't know, I'm probably like too in love with Excel. I think it's a great tool. But if you see like Excel 95 colors, for example, that's probably it's a good sign that that process needs to be updated, because
Yeah.
it means that spreadsheet has been alive for, I don't even know how many years now, like 20, almost 30 years, 30
30
years.
years.
Probably time to at least, make a new one.
Yeah.
And companies, because not everybody has that drive to constantly make things better. One of the things that I try to push is, if you get 1% better, even every week or every month, like that's still huge change over the course of a year.
Yeah.
Some of these little tweaks, like just how do I do this 5 minutes faster, can really start to add up over time. And instilling that into your teams is something I think that's hugely important, because the world keeps growing, right? Like my thing is, you have GDP and it's going 2 to 3%, or sometimes more, sometimes a little less, but over 10 years, like there's a huge difference in the productivity of any country. And if you've kind of been flat and everybody else is moving up, you have a gap now. And then all of a sudden you're 10 years into your career and you're like, holy crap, my skills gap is huge. You don't want to be that person, but also, I mean, for your business, you need to keep up with it. I think businesses get more regular feedback from customers, from the market, but personally too, I think it's super important that you keep learning and keep seeing what you can implement and do better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You also talked a little bit about getting into the real estate world on the rental side. You want to talk a little bit about that and what you're working on?
Yeah, so two things. One, my wife and I started purchasing rental properties a bit ago, and that's been going really well. And then I have a group of, really, I mean, almost family, but super close friends that have done something there as well. We're mainly in the US. Unfortunately, Canada, it's really hard to cash flow here on a property. I'm sure there's still some pockets there. I just don't know the market as well. So in the US, there's just more options. I mean, it's a larger country, more towns. And I think there's larger options and better deals to be had, or just cheaper housing to be able to cash flow on. So, Canada has like the same level of rent, but you're paying like 4 times, 5 times the amount for the house.
Yeah.
In some areas, like we have some in central Illinois, and one in Pennsylvania, like rural Pennsylvania, and one in like Memphis. And again, those are all like pretty reasonably priced areas where, if you're paying rent, you're probably paying a little bit of a premium, but at the same time, people can still kind of, people can still afford housing, and it's not crazy. I love it as an asset. It's multidimensional. It's very easy to leverage. We've experienced a lot of inflation, so usually the inflation, you realize in the appreciation of your house, and the debt stays the same. So
Yeah.
that's I think advantage you get over time. And
Yeah.
it's a good way to expand your portfolio, and it's a little more work than just buying stocks and ETFs.
Yeah.
But once you kind of jump in and learn it, I think it scales fairly easily.
Yeah, it's always funny in the US market, because a lot of times you can buy properties, especially in that Midwest area, for prices that are what a lot would cost out here. right? Like just a little chunk of land is the same as buying a house down there. And you're right, in a lot of cases, the rent is fairly comparable. So a lot easier to make cash in the US market, certainly. Are you guys doing single family houses or condos, apartments?
Mostly single family houses.
Yeah.
So we had a one mixed use building, and we're looking into multi-tenant. Although that jump, um, I've seen people really like it kind of becomes too big too fast.
Hmm.
So doing single family homes, usually they're all at the same price point, and then a multi-tenant home is, whatever, it's 10 units, it's going to be roughly 10x that price point.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
quite. It can be very lucrative, but also you have to be super careful because the maintenance can eat you alive on that type of property as well. So we're mainly in single family. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. There's, well, first of all, I think there's a myth when people call it passive income, because there's no such thing as passive income. Even on the real estate side, there's always work to be done.
exactly.
But it's certainly more passive when you're dealing with a single family house than when you go up to, say, a 10 or a 20 unit building, because you're 10x on the problems that can happen. You're 10x on the communication with tenants. You're 10x on all of those different things. So it does scale much more rapidly, and it turns it into certainly much less passive than on just a single family rental.
Yeah, and I mean, one model is like my wife and I are doing more the model of like having somebody else manage the property, and that seems to be working pretty well. There's that tends to be, I would say, more passive, but you still got to pay attention to them.
Yeah.
So it's less work, but it's still some work. And then on the more work side of just managing yourself, it is, I think if you're in an area and you have more than one property, it starts to scale again because you can find your contractors, and like we have a you joke because we have a guy named Guy that would just do some stuff for us like when we needed little fixes.
Yeah.
Find a handyman, and that helps because they like it because you have a bunch of properties, so you're probably using them pretty regularly. And for us it's very convenient to just have somebody that kind of almost not quite on call, but like that's willing to just kind of
Mhm.
jump over and do some work for you, because sometimes there's just this floorboard is loose or something and you need somebody to just go over and like hit it with a hammer or screw it down. Like
Yeah.
not very difficult stuff. And yeah, some of the tenants are going to be more work than others. Some tenants you don't even, they pay you your rent on time, you don't hear from them for like 5 years, and that's normal. And then other tenants you hear from them every month and they pay you late, and yours. So you gotta, it's some of the learnings that you go through. I think you definitely need to have a little bit of a capital buffer when you do this the first time.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. What got you into the rental property game? Are you a bigger pockets kind of guy, following that podcast and things like that?
So I mean, I'll tell you, I'm kind of kicking myself because I actually started out, I bought a condo in 2005 in the US, which was probably the worst time to buy. And basically just got kind of crushed on that one, and then didn't do anything for a while. And that was actually, the mistake was not jumping back in and learning from
Yeah.
the mistakes. That one had an issue with the property tax as well. It just wasn't evenly allocated in the condominium complex. So it just would never cash flow. And these are the things you learned. I should have just taken that and ran with it.
Yeah.
And really what got me into it is a way to create wealth that is not the slow version of like just save money and throw it in your RSP and then, wait 60 years and then you retire and that's it.
Yeah.
As well as like diversification, because again, the market can go to like, yes, we had a housing crash, but also the market could crash and housing stays relatively stable. I mean, even in COVID, I wouldn't have predicted that we net benefited from that on the housing side, which
Yeah.
was bananas. I mean, it seemed like the housing values just got unlocked during that period, where you had this slow growth and all of a sudden they shot up. I think it's stabilizing now, but again, you just don't know. And so being multidimensional on your assets is key, because then what else can you do? The only other thing you can do is kind of own your own business in some degree. So you have your income stream usually from your job, and then you have some retirement, the stock market, and then you have housing. So just diversification, as well as I think being financially free as fast as possible is a motivation for myself and for my wife and for our partners. And it's not that we're not going to want to stop working and retire and sit on the beach, but more just that freedom to be able to not need that addiction to the paycheck.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The self-sufficiency behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I talk a lot about from a real estate perspective, one of the really nice things about that as part of that investment portfolio is you really have three avenues to make money in real estate versus, if you're in a business, well, a business might have a couple. Personally, you probably only have one where it's just, an income from a job. But in
Right.
real estate, you can have a cash flow component of it. You can have an appreciation component of it, and then you can have a debt pay down component. And
Correct.
all of those kind of work together, and you hope that you're getting all three, and that's where you see really big returns.
Mm.
And then you're able to take that equity, reinvest it into additional properties, and kind of grow it that way. But even if you don't have all three of those running, you're still likely hitting two of those. And again, if you don't have two of those running, well, you're still hitting one of them, right? You're still getting a debt pay down. So even kind of in the worst case scenario, you're still building wealth, just maybe not as fast as you might want it to be.
Yeah, and that's why you diversify, don't throw all your eggs in one basket. But I do think, especially if you're younger, like starting out is key. I think there's a level of maturity when you start running your own investments versus, passively looking at stocks. And even like I've had people that have, coached and they said, how do I get into stock trading? And I'm like, go buy a stock. Like, I don't care which one. Throw a dart at the Wall Street Journal, prospectively
Yeah.
or whatever. That's how you're going to learn. Don't look at it as an investment, look at it as tuition. And if you make some money on it, great. I think Tim Ferriss had that like real world MBA where he just like invested in startups and that was his MBA version. And
Yeah.
I do think that experience helps as long as you're okay, I'm going to learn from this and maybe I'll lose all my money. Now in a house, your chances are probably not unless you burn the place down or something inadvertently. But
And don't have
outside of that,
insurance.
yeah, or don't have insurance or miss something big. Like, but
Yeah.
even then, there's enough checks in place where like they're not going to let you buy the place unless you have insurance on it. So, I mean, maybe if you buy it outright, you can get away with that. But most of us don't carry that kind of cash.
Yeah. Well, and even if people, this is another conversation I've actually had a lot with people is when you do pay down your debt on your rental portfolio, you want to bring it back up,
Right.
right? And redeploy that capital because your return is always going to be limited if you don't take out debt. But if you're taking out debt and say you can go from $1 million rental portfolio to 2 million by taking out additional debt and going buying those properties, you're doubling your return essentially. There's some different metrics that go into that, but you're giving yourself the ability to double that return.
Exactly. And when you get to retirement, you can live tax free because you can pull debt out and let the properties keep paying for themselves. And that debt is, you can live off of and not not incur taxes. I mean, this is what the really wealthy does with their stock portfolios, right? Like if
Yeah,
I have $1 billion stock portfolio, I can borrow 1% a year and I'm fine,
yeah,
and
you'll live comfortably.
yeah, in yeah, you'll be able to afford your yacht. You'll be okay.
Yes, yeah. Well, and that's the Elon Musk approach, and like you said, a lot of those the ultra wealthy, like that's what they're doing. They're just borrowing against the assets, and then the assets keep going up as well. So you're borrowing against something that has continually appreciated over time, and
Yeah.
so
This is something
it's
that's not
definitely a
even
good
taught in
strategy.
like, top tier accounting schools as I would have some, so I think really like, it's up to you to keep learning because you're only going to learn so much through the education system. And then it's okay,
Yeah,
you're on your own, figure out how to keep learning and applying these things to your life, to your job. If I was going to pick a theme for today's conversation, I think that would be it. It's
yeah,
how am I learning these things and putting them into practice?
yeah. Well, on that note, how do you think the experience that you've had in those various industries, so whether that's manufacturing, cannabis, nuclear, which I'm very interested in,
Yeah.
cybersecurity services, or in the real estate side of things, how do you think that has helped you with what you're doing now and say in your current role with the organization or building out a real estate portfolio?
So, I mean, in terms of my current role, I think everything kind of culminates into what you can do now. Being able to go in and having the opportunity, I call it, to fix the broken toys. I think once you do it a couple of times, you know where like things start to rhyme, you know where the problems probably are, and you have a set list. Actually, if you go on my LinkedIn, I put an assessment out there a while ago, and I think it's really simple, but it's what I do when I look at a company. Even if just somebody reaches out and says, "Hey, I think something's wrong," I could probably look at it in a couple hours and say, "Here's what you need to do." Um, the the thing on like rental real estate, I think is also helps because really you're running your own business. Like each house is its own P&L.
Yeah.
And the more you have, the more you can aggregate. But I think if you look at it that way and like, how am I running this business? Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? I mean, we've recently made sense to sell some properties because they weren't working, and we know where the properties are working better and what we want to invest. So it's taking those skills of how would I actually run a multi-billion dollar company and distilling that to what does that mean for this. You can do it with far less bureaucracy. You don't have to like call Carl and talk to Jane and make sure that everything's kosher, when you're running your own thing. But at the same time, you can still bring those good practices of like, do we have discipline? Are we doing regular meetings? I mean, look, our real estate business probably is better, has probably more board oversight than, some publicly traded companies I know of. So,
Yeah.
it's, if you can choose to take that stuff and just run it in your life, and it works pretty well, I think.
Another thing that came up in your intro or in your bio was that you enjoy music, playing music. Can you go into that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I mean, in high school, I started playing guitar and just had been in bands basically from then until till college, and then I decided like probably should get a real job because I wasn't. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm like was a decent guitar player, but not anywhere near good. And also, I don't know if I wanted that life. Who knows? When your hobby starts becoming work, it sometimes becomes not as fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe talk to some famous musicians and they can tell you otherwise. But so yeah, it's still part of my life, still fun. Sometimes my wife's pretty musical too, so sometimes we'll do some just sit down and like do a song or together or something just to have fun.
Yeah.
And it's just a piece, I think, of life that helps or that I find very enjoyable.
Yeah.
And I don't know, my musical taste, I would say in high school were embarrassing, and broadened my horizons since then. So, yeah.
I don't think any of us are all that proud of our playlists from junior high and high school, but that's okay. That's okay.
There's still some good, sometimes you come back. I mean, nostalgia is a good thing, but
Yeah.
sometimes you're like, well, actually that song was way better than I thought it was,
Yeah.
Or like that song was really about something that I totally did not catch the first time around.
Right.
Yeah.
So for you, what's next? What's on the horizon?
Well, right now, I mean, with Pluralock, we are moving fast and furious to getting to our profitability goals as well as growing the business. We have a lot of things on tap that we've been I can't necessarily talk about right now, but there's a lot of work behind the scenes and a lot of long days, but it's to continue that journey. I think we've got something really good there. On the personal side and on the investment side, I mean, we're going to keep being with the building more houses and building wealth there, and running that process, and hopefully I have some time to just learn a few new songs in the interim.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. If somebody wanted to learn more about maybe the organization, what you're doing, or reach out and connect with you, where would they go for that?
So best place to get me is actually on LinkedIn. So it's Scott-Myers-CPA is the I guess my LinkedIn handle. I don't know what.
Yeah, I think that's called a handle there. Yeah, at the end of the URL.
But yeah, that's the best way to reach out. Or if there's a question on Pluralock, or somebody wants to contact us about their cybersecurity, LinkedIn's great there. Go to our website, pluralock.com, PLURILOCK.com. And you can hit us up there.
Awesome. Well, certainly appreciate having you on the show today, Scott, and wish you the best in the future, whether it's organizational wise or building out that rental portfolio.
Appreciate it, Matt. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Beyond Wealth, Success Unscripted with Matt Calnan. Want to be our next guest? Visit beyondwealthpodcast.ca/guest. See you on the next episode.